This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome, all. I want to talk today about the Indian of Hafganot and demonstrations in halacha according to the Torah. Now, I just want to start with a fascinating story. In the beginning of the days of the state, right when Israel was founded in 1948, so there was still a lot of internal divisions left over, amongst the warring militias, the warring political parties. It was very not simple what the nature of the state was going to be, who was going to control the neshama of the state, so to speak. Between the Irgun and the Etzel and the Lechi and Mapai and amongst Haredim, there was a lot of, minor infighting in subgroups, and people trying to grab a piece and see if they could shape the narrative of the state. Now, that led to these underground groups that would protest or that would try to be seditious and fight and try to change the country in their own way. Now, one of the most fascinating groups that existed during that period is a group called the Brit HaKanoim. It was a Haredi group that was formed by a few Kanoim in Yerushalayim to try to fight for Chil Shabbos, against Chil Shabbos, and fight against the Giyas Banis, and fight against the things that the state was trying to impose on the Haredim who lived there. Now, incidentally, the founders of this group called the Brit HaKanoim were some relatively famous individuals who later made a big impact in Eretz Yisrael. Chief amongst them was Reb Mordechai Eliyahu, who eventually goes on to become the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. But in the early days, while he was learning in a kollel called Medrash Sinai, him and some of his chaverim, one of them being Eliyahu Raful, one of them being Yehuda Ribner, I think his name was, they formed this group together to try to fight back against, what they perceived and what they were correctly perceiving as attacks on Yiddishkeit in the new state of Israel. Now, so it's very interesting what happened to them. Basically, they were learning in a kollel in Yerushalayim during the Milchamot HaShachor during 1948, and eventually when the state forms and the government forms and they realized that it had all sorts of anti-Haredi ambitions, they decided to form a group to push back and to try to fight this thing. And Mordechai Eliyahu, who goes on to become a very serious Talmid Chacham, managed to smuggle some guns and some grenades and some bullets to the point when eventually, years later, we'll talk about how it gets to this, when Medrash Sinai is raided to put an end to the Brit HaKanoim, they find 6 grenades, a whole bunch of handguns, 1,500 bullets, all sorts of gear, Molotov cocktails, all sorts of gear for creating ruckus. Now, so what was their goals? So this was founded on Cholomei and Pesach in 1950. These few young men got together. They incorporated several of their friends, several other people. The future Chaver Knesset, Shlomo Lawrence, who goes on to be a Chaver Knesset for a long time, the chairman of the budget, I think even, he joined the Brit HaKanoim. It was like about 35 people. There was a few women even who joined the Brit HaKanoim. And together they gathered. And they had even like a special chant they would say together. And the ending of it is the interesting part, meaning they wrote down that our road is long, and this is our achrayus, and we have to push back and fight back. And then at the end, they would say, repeat after me, like a swearing in ceremony, repeat after me. The pasuk that says, Halei Sanecha Shemesna, meaning it's our achrayus to do battle and to push back against the people who hate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that was like the swearing in ceremony. Now, what they would do, one of their original things that they would do is they would walk around Yerushalayim on Shabbos with a Tanakh, like a Tanakh that has everything in it, that has, hundreds, thousands of pages in it. And they would dog-ear the corners of the pages of the Tanakh to mark off the license plates of cars that were driving on Shabbos. Meaning if they'd see the license plate, they'd mark it off, dog-ear this, dog-ear that, and together, you'd put together the license plate, and after Shabbos, they'd all meet up, and each one would produce his Tanakh, and now they had a list of taxis and cars who were driving on Shabbos. Then the next part would be to go figure out where these cars were registered, where they lived, and for that was the women's chilek. The women would go into the government offices with some sort of pretense and say why they needed this information, and try to extract this information about where these cars lived, and then they would go firebomb these cars. I don't know exactly how many they firebombed, but they firebombed a bunch of taxis, a bunch of cars of Mechalei Shabbos in Yerushalayim during that tkufa. Now, this came to the attention of the government, who was very unhappy about it, and Isser Harel, the founding head of the Mossad, the Shabak, the Mossad in Eretz Yisrael, planted informant in the Brit HaKanayim. He got someone who could present as a Kanai, who would join, who signed on, and he started getting information out. But he wanted to catch them in the act, so to speak, so they could really bust them. So he waited a little bit, and in 1950, when the sugya of Giyas Banis, or drafting women to the army, was being raised in the Knesset, in a planetary session, they had a plan to smoke bomb the Knesset hall. What they were going to do is the electricity that the Knesset, they figured out where the transformer, where the breaker box of the electricity to the Knesset was. They were going to have one person cut the wires and turn off electricity, and another person was going to bring in a smoke bomb, and the whole place would be full of smoke, and that's how they were going to interrupt the Knesset meeting. Israel wanted them to be allowed to get to some stage so that he could arrest them, in mid-act. So he gave a heads up to the Yoshev Rosh of the Knesset at that time, whose name was Yosef Spratznik, or Sprat, it's a hard last name to pronounce. And he gave him a heads up. He said, listen, there's going to be some interference during the session. Don't worry, no danger will come to you. Just be patient, we're going to arrest them. But the Yoshev Rosh of the Knesset was not able to be patient. He was extremely fearful of what was going to go on. And he wrapped it. He saw it was a contentious session. He wrapped it up quickly so that the plan was never able to go to fruition. At that point, Isser Harel decided that enough is enough. And they burst in and they arrested all the members of the Brit HaKanayim. They raided the kollel that they were from. They raided all their equipment, and they hold them in front of a judge. Now, the judge, interestingly enough, and this has to do with the Tkufa, meaning since this was a time of settling down where all the different factions that were, competing to be in charge of Israel had to somehow group together and work with each other. So the judge was somewhat sympathetic to the needs of these members of the Brit HaKanayim, and instead of coming down extremely harshly on them and sentencing them to long-term prison terms, he sentenced them to anywhere between half a year to a year, not more than that. And in his closing, he explained that I'm not looking to break these people. These are young men full of a fire of Kanayis and Yiddishkeit, and he understands how this happens. And I'm not looking to break these people's spirit. All I'm trying to do is break their movement. So to break their movement, I feel it would be sufficient if I sentence them to 6 months or a year. That would be enough to break their movement. Now, these people go to prison, and eventually each one of them gets out, and a lot of them go on to very fruitful, successful lives in the state of Israel. Beresham, Shlomo Lawrence and Mordechai Eliyahu will go on to have, major careers. Now, it's interesting, but what this triggers to me is the idea. So clearly, this seems to be taking it a little too far, right? This seems to be like they're pushing the Kanayis to a point where it's unacceptable. So what is the acceptable amount of a response to Kanayis that would be yes, acceptable? I mean, let me just frame this a little better. What I'm saying is that during the time of the Brit HaKanayim, the Chazon Ish commissioned Rabbi Moshe Scheinfeld to write like a response, a Haredi response to what we think about this act, how these people are acting. And I'll read you what the Chazon Ish commissioned him to write, just to frame the subject. So the Chazon Ish writes as follows. Not the Chazon Ish. Moshe Scheinfeld writes, b'shem the Chazon Ish. Scheinfeld writes b'shem the Chazon Ish. He says, L'noichach hatzasas ha'mecholiyot b'Yerushalayim v'motzas k'moshe Imrim. This that we heard, that there's people who are burning cars in Yerushalayim, Hamakanim es kinas Shabbos kedeshenu. Hinenu machrizim. We are announcing la'achash sh'shalu es pi gedei hadar, and that's the Chazon Ish. We're announcing after we consulted with the Chazon Ish, with the gedei hadar. Loizu aderech v'lei be'ela chelik Yaakov. This is not the proper way, and this is not the way that Klal Yisrael does things. Ha'osim din la'atzmam. He says, Leinatlu eitzim v'chafmei HaTorah. These people did not come to consult with the Chafmei HaTorah. Ve'ein ruach hachamim leichem enu. Lei b'masei alimut tushlat HaTorah akdeshim mitzvaseh. Not with acts of alimut, of violence, will the Torah's, reign be shelet and mitzvahs be adhered to. He says, Ki d'racha darchinoyim v'chol nesivaseh shalom. Because the derech for the Torah is darchinoyim v'chol nesivaseh shalom. He says, HaTerror zmura zarhu b'kerem hayadas and amunah. Terror, acts of terror, is an outside influence. It's not how Jews do things. He says it's pre-biyusha v'shal meflagot chiloniyot v'hamachanchas l'aritzvain v'kitzer baruch shalei asinu k'chilonim le'derachechem derachenu al yech alkeinu imoem. And we're going to do this the right way. So Kilo the Chazon Ish and the Gedolim of the time were saying that these meisim of terror and alimut is too far. This is not how you're supposed to respond when we're being challenged for religious freedom. Now, the question is, we all know, we're very aware that during the early days of the states, during the Tkufa of Giyas Banis, which was the law the Knesset sought to pass to draft women into the army, and then when that didn't work, they said at least they'll give them a Sheret Blumi, everyone would have to do some sort of civil service. The G'dalim, Beresham, and the Chazon Ish, and the Briskirov came in extremely strongly against this and said that, no, we have to go out in the streets, we have to be mafkin. The Chazon Ish, famously wrote that all the G'dalim of the day, the Shabina, Risa Zalman, and Pesach Frank, but the Chazon Ish was the one who said it like this. The Chazon Ish said that this Be'enov is Yehareg Lal Yavar, meaning this has the Chaymer of Yehareg Lal Yavar, and maybe even La Halacha, he said. Maybe it's even Yehareg Lal Yavar La Halacha, which means not just, not just to say Al Chamer, maybe even La Halacha, it's actually Yehareg Lal Yavar. Now, B'chol there was Hafganot that were called in the streets, and there was rallies, and ultimately in a lot of these inyanim, they were successful, and they got these laws, like, what do you call it? Like Giyas Banis, like drafting the girls, or like autopsies, and many of these different laws that they were able to get pushed away, or the Charedim were able to get deferrals from because of these protesting. So I just want to go into the Inyan a little bit. What is the tachlis of a protest, and what are the okay parameters of a protest according to the Torah? So let's just start from the beginning. So there's a Gemara. It's in two places, in Rosh Hashanah and in Tainus. But the Gemara says as follows: Pamachas, it says as follows: Pamachas. Gazru Malchus Arisha Gzeira. The Malchus Arisha made a Gzeira. Shaliyaska B'Torah Shaliyimuelu B'Neim V'Shichalu Shabbos. They made a Gzeira that Klal Yisrael couldn't keep the Torah. Holchlu V'Natlu Eitzim V'Matunisa Achas. The Gemara says so. The Rabbanim went and they took advice from a woman of high society. Amr Lehem, she told them, Bayu V'Hifkinu, come make a Hafganah, come make a protest. The other nusach is Tzu V'Hifkinu. There's two different gears, but Bayu V'Hifkinu, Tzu V'Hifkinu. She told them, Bayu V'Hifkinu Balayla, come make a protest at night. Amru, and what did they protest? What did they say when they were making the protest? Amru, they said, Ei Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, Lo Yachicham Anachnu, are we not your brothers? V'lei b'nei av echad anachnu, v'lei b'nei eim achas anachnu, manish daninu mikol umah v'lashin shat, the Gerizim will in Xeris Kashas. Why are we different than any other nation that you've been Gerizim Xeris Kashas on us? Ubitlam, and they were attacking Vatal Xeris, v'oisei ayem aso yamtiv, and that day they turned into a yamtiv. So now, this is a Gemara where Chazal give us the blueprint of protesting, and maybe a little bit of the Havana, what the tachlis of a protest is. Now, there are many who wanted to make diukim in this Gemara, and I'll read you some. There's a Shuvah Sefer called Shut B'nei Banim from Rav Yehuda Hertz Henkin. He's Rav Henkin's grandson. I think he's the father of Rav Eitam Henkin, who was killed, Hashem Henkin Dami, who was killed in a terrorist attack, who was a young Talmud Chacham of Eretz Yisrael. He has a tshuva where he makes interesting diukim in this Gemara, and interestingly enough, for Pinchas Taitz, in an article in the Hamar, makes very similar diukim. Now, what his diuk is as follows. He says, if you look at the words, it says, first of all, it says, who did they go to consult with? They didn't go to consult, with themselves. The Rabbanim didn't sit down and have a conversation amongst themselves and say, what would be the proper thing to do over here? Should we make Hafganah? Should we not make Hafganah? How do we go about it? The Rabbanim went to discuss it with a woman who would have some knowledge of the political machinations of the time. She could advise them as to what would be the correct and what would be the improper, results-based kilu. What would be the best mahalach to get a result that you're looking for? So they went to consult with political people. They went to McKenzie and asked them, what would be the right move over here? How would we get through the Congress? How would we get the result that we're looking for in this situation? So that's, diak number one. The second diak is that she told them to Ginu Balayla, which the Marsha already points out that, there's something there. The Marsha says to Ginu Balayla because the voice carries very well. And I'll read it. The Marsha says, it's more able to be heard, it carries, and you get more Rahmanis. So the way the Marsha is learning the Gemara is Suviv Ginu Balayla meant beg for sympathy. Don't come and say, you're an anti-Semite, you're terrible, you're bad. Come and ask with a humbleness, have Rahmanis on us, please, like, Ei Shamayim, Alayacham Anachnu, are we not all the same? Why should we be penalized? Why should we be looked at differently? So he's drawing from this Gemara, from the Dik in this Gemara, like certain pratim in the mechanics of the protest. Now, interestingly, the Repilchas Taitz, in a tshuva that he wrote in the Hamar, in regards to protesting about Jews who were trapped in the Soviet Union, And this itself was always a big shiloh, mashal, during the times of the World War II. How to go to make a boycott against the Nazis, to not make a boycott against the Nazis, is that going to make it worse? So when Jews were trapped in the Soviet Union, there was a big question, what's the pressure point? How do you appropriately, achieve your goals? So he says as follows: the shiloh that was posed to him was, is it appropriate for Bnei Torah and with someone to participate in these different protests that are organized by different organizations to try to get a result of freeing, the Russian Jewry who was trapped behind the Iron Curtain? So he says, he says, it's before Shigmar. Chazal already gave us very clear instructions on how to deal with such a situation. Because the Rosh Hashanah, B'tainis, Muva, the story, and Chazal went and protested. He says, of the zoo is you have a story from Chazal that tells you it's permitted and it's allowed, it's even desirable to stage your protest, to get the result you're looking for. But he says, and similar to what the Yehuda Hartzenken is saying, this diyukim to be made from this Gemara. Chazal are clearly saying, what's to do over here. And he makes the same deal. First of all, the Matronisa, she was an insider, she's b'fnim. Second of all, Tzuv V'Kinu B'Layla, and he learned the Tzuv V'Kinu B'Layla a little bit different than what the Marsha is saying. He says Tzuv V'Kinu B'Layla means try to seek out the lines of division that exist amongst the different political entities or parties that are existing in your sphere, and try to get someone on your side. Tzuv V'Kinu B'Layla means with some sort of, surreptitious play, some sort of way to creep in and to figure out how to get the result that you're looking for. Now, what this shows us, Akapanim, from these two tshuvas and the way they're learning the Gemara, is that the idea of Hafganot, according to these tshuvas and the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara Tainis, is results based. Meaning, just to go out and protest on the street, if you have zero hope that what you're going to do is going to lead to a result, you feel powerless, no one's listening, it's not going to do anything. According to what these diukim, these tshuvas are making from the Gemara, there would be no taflis in Tzuv V'Kinu. Tzuv V'Kinu is an idea of accomplishing a result. It's a way to try to get it. It was a way with political savvy to try to accomplish the result that you're looking for. Now, incidentally, Rav Moshe, in a tshuva about protesting in regards to autopsies, Rav Moshe has a fascinating idea that I want to share. And in there's another raya that L'chayr Rav Moshe also learned the idea of Hafganot to be results-based. The idea was to try to get a result, to try to get something different, to get a change accomplished. And that's as follows: during the time of the autopsy battle in Eretz Yisrael, so the Kolkari that actually came out is actually it's in bold. Interesting. The top letters is Mulchamas Hashem, and then in bold it's Tzuv V'Kinu B'Layla. It's a call to arms. Everyone should go be mafkin B'Layla, and it's signed by the whole Eidah Charedis and by many other Gedalim to go protest against autopsies. Now, Rav Moshe in Yeridei Chelik Beis has a tshuva as follows, a fascinating question. Someone asked him, they had an idea. In order to drive home the point of what type of nivel ames and what type of disrespect this was to the bodies of people who were being, autopsied on, or medical experiments are being, done to them, they suggested, why don't we take pieces of the body, meaning if the body that had an autopsy done to it comes back a little bit sahak, so take a piece of the mace and bring it to the protest and hold it up for people and say, look, this is what we're protesting again. We're protesting again people being menavel the mace to this degree. Look at this bizayon. Look what's going on over here. So now mitzad echad, you're contributing to the bizayon mace because you're going to bring a body part of a mace to a protest. That's a pretty serious bizayon to the mace. Mitzad sheni, by highlighting this nakuda that there's nivel mace going on, you're also, so to speak, contributing to maybe getting it fixed. Now, Rav Moshe in the tshuva, he has a fascinating raya. Rav Moshe brings the story, and I think we've discussed this in the past, the story of Pilegesh Begiva, where there was a man who was traveling through Shevet Binyamin's Chelik of Eretz Yisrael, together with his Pilegesh, and they couldn't find proper lodgings, and the Pilegesh ends up getting terribly defiled by the people, and when he realizes, to make a long story short, she gets terribly defiled by the locals, and when he sees what was done to his wife, what he does is he takes, not his wife, his Pilegesh, he takes this Pilegesh, and he chops up her body into pieces, and he sends them to every one of the Shvatim all over Klal Yisrael to say, look what Binyamin did. It says, the Pasuk tells us, he says, he cut them up, V'shalchem b'chol gvul Yisrael. So that it should make a Rosham in Klal Yisrael and say, look what was done. Look what Avla was done. And Klal Yisrael should come to his defense. So Rav Moshe says, L'cher yesh le'chiach gam lekan. that Shul Tzerach Din Torah Shemachiyav Kol Yisrael Lahater Lahashis Kuras Eivarim Ulahaviyam Lamakam Hafganot La'Irer Ha'am Kadesh Yiviu Zel Lebit Like Zera. So Moshe says from this Makar, and it's a little bit longer than that, but from this Makar from Pelagish Forgiver, Moshe says the would have a raya that would be permitted to take these Eivarim from these Mesim and bring them to the Hafganot, so to impact people to get this change. Now the diak over the last line, Moshe says La'Irer Ha'am Kadesh Yiviu Zel Lebit Like Zera, to be La'Irer the Am so that it should lead to the Bittul Like Zera. So again, you see Moshe seems to be from the school of thought that's learning that the tachlis of Hafganot is to accomplish the results, and therefore it has to be sensitive to the political climate, to the environment. It has to be done with knowledge as to what are you going to accomplish by this? What's going to be accomplished? How is this going to achieve your goals? Stam to protest in a non-goal based way, in a way that's not after going to lead to the outcome you're looking for, according to these many different chuvas, would sound like might be bracha, might be something that serves no purpose. Now, there's even some who say this explicitly that protests at a time when nothing's going to happen. L'moshel, it's Yadua that the Brisker Rav, who sent people out to protest for Giyas Banis, was not pro-protest in general. It wasn't something that the Brisker Rav usually participated in, and he said that this is an exception because Yari Yaver. He once supposedly, they say over that he once told the Rambam Bloy, or he told the people around him, he says that Yom HaAtzmaut is a day that only extremists are busy with. He says either you're busy saying Hallel and your mom is taking it so seriously, he says that's all the way to one side. Or you're busy protesting and wearing sackcloth and ashes, that's all to the other side. He says what regular people are doing, they're ignoring it. It's nothing. So the Brisker Rav, felt that the proper way to go to accomplish the result over there of having Yom HaAtzmaut not take root in the Charei Shekela was to just ignore it. So it's results based. It's not just go out and protest Suv Kino at all times. It's a results-based enterprise. I think Justam once, a different time, Brisker Rav once told the Rambam Bloy that, B'atzim, you're a big tziyoni. He says, because I would be afraid to go out and protest. I'm afraid they'll kill me. But you trust them that they're not really going to hurt you. So you're really a big tziyoni, told the Rambam Bloy. Now, there's this perspective that I would call, one side of the story. This perspective that protesting is all results-based. Hafganot to lead to the proper result you're looking for, not more than that. Now, there's two other tzadim as to what the tachlis of Hafganah is, and Memela when to use it and when not to employ it. And that is, one is that the idea of the Hafganah is techacha, is a mefurish, there's a pasuk, right? The pasuk says that a person is mechuyev to give techacha to his friend who he sees who's being over an avera. Now, that would only be relevant in Eretz Yisrael, where everyone's Yidden. That would never be relevant to Chutz La'aretz. That's not a protest that can be relevant to anywhere else. But the idea of so Chazal in Erechin, with that Tazayin and Beis, Chazal say Lahadya Vinay l'Chaveira l'Roya b'Chaveira Dav Mugona Shechai l'Chicha Shnamar Chayach T'Chiach. You're Mechuyev Chayach T'Chiach. Now, like Gemara says, Chicha v'Leikibel. Let's say you're Lechiach, your friend, he wasn't Mekabel, you're Muslim. Vinay Sheyatzav Yechichoi. How do you know you should go tell him again? Tell him Techiach. Chazer it over. Mikol Makeh. Yochel afilu mishtad upon him. Maybe if he's getting embarrassed, you have to back off. You shouldn't tell him anymore. Tell him l'sisel of chet. You have to. Tanya Rav Tarfon. Ani yesh bedar. Rav Tarfon says, Temani ani I'm uncertain. Yesh bedar azesh mekabel techacha. I don't know if there's anybody in this dar who's mekabel techacha. Now, because and what he meant is because the mechichim are imperfect vehicles. So no one's going to accept techacha for them. Yich Shia, the din of techacha is a pasuk, it's a gemara, it's kapasik in the Shulchan Aruch Mefurish. That is a din that if a person sees his friend, the fellow from Jew, committing an avera, yes, b'mechichem. Now, the caveat to this, and I don't want to get too lost in the sugya, the caveat to this is that there's gemara in Yevamis that says as follows. Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Lai, Mishum Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, Kishem shemitzvah al adam lemed davar nishma, tach mitzvah al adam shaloi lemed davar she'en nishma. Which Rashi says, Lemed Davar Nishma is referring to Techacha, Rashi says. So meaning the Gemara in Yevamis introduces another element to us, that there's a chiv to say Techacha, it's not just to go out and say it. They just blurt out Techacha and you yotze. Techacha itself is results-based. Meaning, if you think someone's not going to listen to you, then to stam go and say Techacha only makes him feel angry and, disconnected from you, and if anything, it will lead to like a certain kriros, like a disconnect between Charedim and people who aren't so Charedi, and it would be, not serving the purpose. Additionally, there's obviously the chelik of the sugya of shegig and mezid. I don't want to go into that this second. Now, interesting to note that Rav Shlomo Zalman was asked about this concern that we'll come back to the second. Now, another nekuda in the techachesh would be how the chi of techacha would only apply to someone who's Charedi, someone who's from. Someone who's not from, to give them this techacha is clearly a waste. It's not going to get any result. Now, how to look at the people who are not from in our generation, so that itself is a great machlekes haposkim. Kaidua, the Chazon Ish, in Siman Aleph in Yeridei, the Chazon Ish writes that in order to be called, Oistin Shenishba, you need to be that they're aware of how to be from. And the Chazon Ish famously writes, and I'll read it for you. The Chazon Ish says, "Tinik Shenishba bein ha'akum dina ki Yisrael." A teenage shenishba, someone who it's not his fault, he's nishba ben akum, has the din of Yisrael shchitasim muteres. Shu becheskas. Why? Because it's bechazaka shemiyediyu v'yishtadlu hima kashir ishtadlus. It's bechazaka that if we would try with him the proper amount, shu roi lashav layazuz lebilti shav. Of course, he would come and do tshuva. Amar machash ishtadlu hima v'umezid u'memay lashav dinik emumar. Once you try and you make a big effort to bring someone around that the teacher was right and what's wrong, and he still refuses to come around to it. So then it becomes the din of a mummer. But says the Chazon Ish, "V'shira ishtadlus talilus v'yizbainenus hadayanim kasher yifiu b'ruach kachim v'achraz dinoi u'be'emes sarach ladana kol ish v'ish b'frat v'oiser shadayaninu le'ka'en zeichen iravure." And then the Chazon Ish continues and he says, "Umi yedeya yesh b'dar azem l'chichem." Who knows if there's anybody in this dar who gained the right amount, who tried the right amount, meaning maybe we just didn't get through. So to say that people who are frag v'zman have the din of a mummer, Yisrael mummer and whatever is not so clear. Maybe they're tinik shenishba. So if they're tinik shenishba, again, to give a tinik shenishba techacha in a harsh manner where he's not really going to understand what you want from him is a waste of time. It's going to lead to just further disconnect and further fighting. So that's the second side, Kilo, of what's going on by Hafganot. Now the third side of what's going on by Hafganot, and this is the interesting one, that is somewhat, call it disconnected from results, disconnected from the sugya of techacha, disconnected from the sugya of tinik shenishba and mummer, meaning this is like something that just kind of is its own thing that is unbound by anything else, and that is that the hafkana is for the people who are from. I once heard, in the Mormon church, there's a thing, Mormons go out to do missionizing for a year or two before they settle down. And I once heard a Mormon elder was interviewed, and they asked him, like, how many converts do you really pick up by sending a few Mormon kids to Sri Lanka to do kiruv? Like, nothing really happens. He told them it's not about that. It's not who we pick up. What it does for the people that we send can't be, can never be matched. Meaning, so hafgana and protesting and pushing back when you see something wrong is itself a vehicle for chizik for the people who are doing the right thing. And this is something that many said it. The Stipler writes, Shafilu, he writes this in a letter in Kranidigr Sechet Aleph. He writes, Shafilu ilohaya barur shamativ le'yitokro klal chas v'shalom. Even if we were 1,000,000% certain and nothing was going to change on Yidei Lachayis, Yigam kein chiv l'hara shel zed. It'd be a chiv to make noise, to protest. Akapanim leman das, so that we should know ki teirasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'nasis hefker chas v'shalom. So that we, the ones who keep the Torah, should be aware that the Rosh HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't become half of Chas V'Shalom. V'chi din v'yiz daina. There's repercussions, there's consequences, and that's how it is. Rav Shlomo Zalman, who was a very soft-spoken individual, who was concerned about relations between Charedim and Chilenim, Rav Shlomo Zalman writes, the problem of causing a disconnect between Charedim and Chilenim has to be secondary to strengthening ourselves. Rav Shlomo Zalman writes that if it's going to strengthen ourselves and we're going to be better off from it, and even if ultimately it's going to cause some sort of disconnect with people who are not as from, it's a sacrifice worth making. Rabbi Yashiv in a tshuva in regards to Shabbos, Rabbi Yashiv writes, someone confronted Rabbi Yashiv and wrote him that there's no point, there's no techacha, there's no tachlis. And Rabbi Yashiv writes back, he says, I don't know who told you that the tachlis, he says, Anole yadano, ma inyan mitzvahs techacha lekan. Otum ataras hafganotu b'shvil kiyam mitzvahs techacha. It's because of the mitzvah of techacha, he says. And then he says, the matar of Hafganot hi la'atzeres magefas ha'aspashtus harisas ha'shabbos. It's to stop the spread of destruction that's washing over us. So again, Rabbi Yashiv says the same concept, that the tachlis of the Hafganot is for the people who are being mafkin. And again, that it's not something that's supposed to be every single day. Our Messiah and our Haga is not to be out on the street every day protesting, obviously. But the idea of Hafganah, according to these Gedolei HaPoskim from Eretz Yisrael in the last Kufa, is disconnected from results. It's disconnected from the original, way the Gemara frames it. It's disconnected from the Sugya of Teichacha, and it becomes more as a chizik for ourselves. The Rosh Hashanah in the Tshuva has the same thing. Rosh Hashanah says it's, Rak Sherish Hamacha, this is a Tshuva in Chelik Aleph, he says, Rak Sherish Hamacha, Hilanu La'atzmeinu Ulevanenu Acharenu. It's for us, for ourselves, and for our children after us. A way to be mechazik, bees and yanim for ourselves, so that they don't slip by us. So, in summation, clearly the Gedolim were mostly, were against alimut, were against acts of terror and violence and destruction. And that's interesting, we didn't get to that today, maybe a different time. What happens if you mazik something by accident? That's accidental hezek is a different shayla. But clearly, hezek on purpose, the Gedolim felt was not the derech and was not the Messiah, and that's not the way of Macha. But once we're in the sugya of Machayis, so then there's several different ways to look at it, and the Poskim and the Gedolim of the last dar seem to certainly feel that the tachlis of a Macha is for us ourselves to strengthen our Yiddishkeit. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com. You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.